History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of Oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 553rd episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to go to a location that is in California, the Hanford Bastille. We not only are going to cover this former jail, so it's right up our alley, but there are a couple of other locations here that are haunted as well to kind of fill out this entire episode. Before we get into talking about the history and hauntings here, we want to welcome into the Spooktacular crew, Eric with the CK at the end, Melissa, Wernerus, Steve, I hope we said that right, Georgette, Bailey, Brian, Kylie, and Dawn, D-O-N.
Thank you so much for joining the Spooktacular crew.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
The moment in Oddity was suggested by Savannah Marchioni. Throughout the centuries, mummies have been discovered after having been mummified by environmental circumstances. However, there's also been a long history of humans mummifying their deceased for various reasons. One such mummified body is that of Achille Chatouet, who was a circus performer that died in 1912. His clown character that he portrayed was known as the French Tickler. Prior to his death, he told his family that he wished to be buried in his clown costume. Specifically, his Shriners Parade costume, which he wore in the first Shriners Parade. Achille's body was embalmed with arsenic and mercury. Due to that toxic combination, his body was sealed in a glass coffin, which kept his body preserved at least until June of 2022. You see, Achille had become a rental property of sorts. The California Institute of Abnormal Arts had rented the clown's mummified remains for many years, but sadly, the location that displayed various oddities, hosted underground bands, and performance artists permanently closed on June 19, 2022. We were unable to find where Achille's body is now. However, it is said that his family lives on a ranch near Yosemite National Park. So he may be in residence there, located in his glass coffin, looking forward to his next adventure. This may sound crass, but clown carrying circulating entertainment venues for cash certainly is odd.
This history podcast is haunted.
And now this month in history.
In the month of August, on the 21st in 1986, Lake Nyos exploded. In all of recorded history, there have only been 2 exploding killer lakes, and they were both in the country of Cameroon. The first occurred in 1984 at Lake Manaun, which killed 37 people. The second occurred at Lake Nyos in 1986 and was more deadly. This was a Limnic eruption, also notoriously known as a lake overturn. This is a unique type of natural disaster where dissolved carbon dioxide suddenly explodes from deep lake waters, creating a gas cloud that asphyxiates wildlife, livestock, and humans. Over 3,000 animals and 1,746 villagers were killed during this event. So what exactly is an exploding killer lake? Basically, these are lakes that were formed from a hydrovolcanic eruption that created a crater in the lakes. Carbon dioxide builds up within this crater over time, just like the CO2 in a soda bottle. The water serves as a type of cap, keeping the CO2 locked down, but sometimes something happens that causes that cap effect to shift. It could be an earthquake or even a monsoon-like rainstorm. In the case of Lake Nyos, it appears that a simple landslide broke the surface and released a giant cloud of carbon dioxide. It exploded upward and stripped the air of oxygen. This could have happened again, but scientists discovered a way to hopefully prevent this type of disaster in the future. In 2001, French scientists installed the first degassing tube to slowly release the carbon dioxide from the lake. This is similar in theory to the burper pipes used at city dumps to release any built-up methane or carbon dioxide. 2 additional pipes were installed in 2011, and by 2019 it was determined that a single degassing tube would be sufficient to keep the lake explosion-free.
The Bastille is a former jail that dates back to the Wild West and ran as a jail for nearly 70 years. The building has had many iterations after it closed as a jail. This was an art gallery, a restaurant, a bar, and a nightclub. Today, it stands empty and in need of major renovations. This may or may not please the current residents of the building, the ghosts. For years, ghost stories have been told about the building. Join us as we explore the history and hauntings of the Hanford Bastille.
The Takiyokuts, and I hope I said that right, were the first to reside in the area that would become Hanford. Immigrants came and farmed the land, and the settlement grew, especially after the Southern Pacific Railroad laid tracks. James Madison Hanford was the auditor for the railroad company, and the town was named for him. Most of the labor for the railroad were Chinese immigrants. James Hanford sold lots in the town, and the growth continued until fires devastated Hanford in the late 1880s and early 1890s. It's like it would come through and wipe out everything in the downtown area. They'd rebuild, and here came another fire, wiped it out again. Hanford was incorporated on August 12, 1891 to facilitate fire protection, and the town became the county seat for Kings County. Growth resumed with lots of building. The only opera house between Los Angeles and San Francisco was here, and a civic auditorium was built. Thriving towns usually find themselves dealing with crime, and Kings County needed an official jail. The Bastille would become that, and it resembles a small castle. So clearly it was meant to be as imposing as a smaller-sized jail could be, because we know they liked to build jails, especially back in that time, like castles, so that it would kind of give you this feeling of, The Bastille is much, much smaller than some of these other places, but it still kind of had that imposing look to it.
Kind of like the Charleston jail.
Yes. The Bastille served as Kings County's jail and sheriff's office starting in 1897.
The McDougall brothers of San Francisco designed the Bastille, and it was considered state-of-the-art for the time. Frank Sharple's Exeter Granite Company was awarded the construction contract. Something didn't bode well for the jail during construction. An associate of Sharple's became disgruntled, and he shot Sharple's in the neck. Sharple's managed to survive. The structure was hewn from solid pieces of granite that weighed around 2 tons each. The outside was overlaid with red brick and was said to be so strong that no jailbreak was possible. Jail cells were made from steel, and there was a capacity of up to 60 inmates. The general population was kept on the first floor, while inmates thought to be insane were kept on the second floor. That only lasted for a brief period of time, and then women and children were kept on the second floor. So all ages and genders were in the Bastille. A jail matron was introduced to the jail in 1917. Her name was Louise Gerabrands, and she was actually the wife of the sheriff. She was paid 25 cents per hour.
To have to be a matron in a jail, 25 cents an hour, give me a break. Because you know she was cooking all the meals and stuff, too.
In the late 1800s. Right?
I mean, it probably was good pay. Now, actually, they were there, maybe in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, I guess.
Yeah, that probably wasn't too BAD.
I guess not, but... For those first couple of decades, the Bastille was well maintained under the Gerabrands. Then Sheriff Charles Gerabrand retired in 1920, and things went downhill for the jail. By 1922, a jail that was meant for 60 inmates had 260 inmates, and conditions became horrible, especially for females who were incarcerated. Several of them were assaulted by both male inmates and guards. Children were abused. Several grand juries convened to try to decide what to do to improve the jail. An addition with more cells was suggested after one, but this never came to fruition. Another ordered improvements to the sanitary conditions. And again, nothing came of this. There were at least 3 suicides at the jail that we'll talk about later. Another inmate who tried to off himself was John Brown. Sheriff William Buckner unlocked the door to Brown's cell, and Brown made a mad dash towards the steel bars of his cell and knocked himself silly, gashing his head open to the skull. A physician stitched him up, and then he was strapped to a cot to keep him from doing any more self-harm. Now, I don't know what floor he was on, but people with mental health conditions were up on that second floor, so maybe he was having a little bit of those issues. Another horrifying incident here at the jail took place in April of 1962. A Hanford laborer named John Holloman was serving a 6-day sentence for public intoxication when his delirium tremens from alcohol detox got the best of him, and he slashed at his throat and the inside of his arm with a razor blade.
Oh my word.
He fortunately survived and would be the last suicide attempt before the jail closed 2 years later.
The Bastille was closed in 1964, but it wouldn't sit empty for long. The jail's next iteration would be as the Bastille Gallery, which was Kings County's Museum of Art. It took 6 months to clean up the jail, and to keep costs down, the walls were covered in burlap. The gallery would remain for a decade. The city of Hanford took over the property, and they thought the best move forward was to demolish the building. But thankfully, many residents were dismayed and formed a committee to fight any kind of demolition. This committee sought out the help of an entrepreneur who was good at saving historic structures and turning them into new businesses. In 1977, the first restaurant and bar moved into the space. Randy Shaw is the building superintendent. The city owns the building, but nothing is being done with it at this time because it has deteriorated so badly. Renovations would take at least $1 million, and the city council recently rejected a plan to fund those renovations here in 2024.
Yeah, I think I saw it was just this last month that they were like, nope, not going to do anything with it. The floor, at least on the second level, most of it is like falling out, so there's big holes in it and stuff. It's definitely
sad.
Not safe. People claim to see faces looking out of the windows and flickering light as if it's coming from candles or lantern lights. Visitors claim to have been touched on the first floor. Shadow figures were often seen in solitary confinement. An apparition of a woman in 1920s period clothing has been seen walking on the staircase. This is more than likely not the most well-known female apparition at the Bastille. That would be Mary, which legends claim was an inmate who hanged herself in the upstairs portion of the jail. Here we go we have legends and then we have true stories. No record of a woman hanging herself here. There was a Mary Fincher who had been an inmate at the jail, and she did die in the jail, but it was from a heart attack. There are at least 3 suicides in the jail that were documented. Ben Hollerman hanged himself in 1940. He was proprietor of the Brunswick Barber Shop in Corcoran and had been booked for drunkenness. He used twine wrapped around a bar above his head in the cell.
Oh,
Yikes.
wow.
Awful.
Yeesh.
An inmate named John J. Alves had been arrested for the murder of his wife and child, and he attempted suicide by slicing his arm with a barber's razor. He was unsuccessful that time, but later did manage to kill himself on June 15, 1937 by hanging. He wasn't quite dead yet when they cut him down, but he died later at the hospital. The sheriff's department has the razor on display with other jail artifacts that he used in the first suicide attempt.
Okay. Another inmate who committed suicide was named Frank McMurdy. A newspaper article claimed that he had been seen 20 minutes before he was found hanging. Frank's ghost is said to be at the Bastille, and he was seen quickly after he died. A newspaper article reads, 2 persons who are occupying the cell in which Frank McMurdy committed suicide at the county jail created a great deal of excitement there last night. They both claim that McMurdy's ghost put in an appearance, and it was as natural as life. When jailer Morris, who was awakened by their screams, got down to the cell and turned on the light, they were both scared white and begged to be removed.
Yeah, I don't know if he was just coming to say goodbye or what. Scared him good. Betsy Lewis wrote in the Hanford Sentinel in 1982, an unsuspecting cocktail waitress ventured up the back stairs in the dark after closing time to find some spare staples. Something resembling a haggard woman in a jail smock was sitting by the windowsill, and it moved. I heard this shriek, recalls Jimmy Jimenez, La Bastille's bartender and manager. So that's what it was called at that time. I thought somebody had grabbed her, but then she just flew down those stairs a minute later. Within seconds, another waitress who had gone to investigate also was making tracks out the front door. Jimenez grabbed a knife and took a look for himself, but it had gone, whatever it was.
All right.
Yeah, it's really cool the way that this was set up. You could have your booth that was in a cell. So you could be sitting in a cell having dinner when it was a restaurant and such.
That's so cool. I love that. Local business owner Jessica Zalay told the Hanford Sentinel in 2021, "We ate and I kept looking up to the second floor balcony. One of the servers whispered in my ear, 'Do you see it?' I was so focused on the balcony, I didn't look at the waitress. I just said, 'I don't know why I keep looking up.' I looked up and I saw a dark shadow like a silhouette of a man standing next to the rail. I was startled. The figure turned and walked right into a brick wall. This is a spot where a prisoner is believed to have hanged himself."
So you got to wonder if that brick wall ever had a doorway in it? Because why would they walk into the wall then?
I would imagine there was.
A cook at the Bastille was washing dishes at a sink when she saw something out of the corner of her eye. She turned and saw what she described as kind of foggy. She couldn't see a mouth or neck, but she could see dark gray hair and 2 dark holes for eyes. The thing then slithered under a table. Woo! No. Another person described seeing Mary as gliding up a spiral staircase. Mary was in a long gown that went up her neck and was from the turn of the century. By 1992, the ghost of Mary had become well known throughout the area. Seances were conducted, but without any results.
The Fresno Flyer interviewed Caitlin Lusk in 2022, who was the recreational coordinator for the Hanford Civic Center at the time. She said, "I absolutely will not come in here after dark, and I never go upstairs. I just can't do it." Lusk went on to share a time when she and a coworker were giving a group of school children a tour of the Bastille. The children had just left the building, and the coworker was in the back room near the cell block when Lusk heard her screaming. Lusk ran back to the room and found her coworker pale and shaking, and the coworker said she felt someone she couldn't see grab her around the neck. There was no one but the 2 women in the jail at the time. Lusk also told the magazine, "I've heard some things, like strange noises coming from upstairs when there's nobody up there. We do have a lot of homeless people who come onto the grounds, so the first thought is that maybe someone broke in looking for a place to sleep. But then we go to investigate and there's nobody there."
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Ghost hunters investigated in 2023 for their episode Dead Man Walking. And it's amazing that they did because, like we said, this place is really deteriorating, so it's not real safe to be walking around everywhere. It was very cool. They had Chandler Riggs of The Walking Dead fame join them. You know Carl?
Yes, I do.
Victor Rosa was a former restaurant manager, and he told the TAPS team that often he would have opening and closing employees claim to see something. For example, they would be downstairs cleaning, and they would look up and see someone watching them from above when they were the only person in the building. Others would claim to feel as though something unseen were standing next to them. The superintendent Shaw told Jason and Steve that a bartender looked over his shoulder one night, and up on the second level he saw a guard dressed in a 1920s era uniform standing there. He looked away and then thought about what he had just seen and that it wasn't possible that it was a real person, and he looked back and the guard was gone.
During the investigation, they heard disembodied steps on the stairs, and they also heard dragging noises. They brought alcohol and cigarettes for trigger objects. They caught a voice saying something when they emptied out the Bastille.
Yeah, so there was nobody in there. They left and then left a recorder going.
Gotcha. Later, with the sound amplified, the voice said, "I think they're gone."
I love that. That is such a great EVP.
They may have debunked people seeing Mary looking out a window because part of the chandelier shows up in one of the windows and could look like a head. Steve and Tango heard disembodied footsteps made with boots in a room on the first level. Both of them later felt as though something were behind them. Tango was tapped on his back. Steve almost said, "Excuse me," when he backed up because it felt like an actual person. There was a really loud audible sound that sounded like a cupboard door being closed. That was their first night of investigating.
For the second night, the sheriff's office loaned them the razor that John Alves had attempted suicide with as a trigger object. They caught some really loud disembodied steps when they asked if Frank McMurdy were with them. There were loud knocks captured, and then there was this really loud metallic sound, which the team thought could be a big piece of metal that looked like it had been on a dust-covered bench and was now on the floor. While they were talking about this, they heard a child make some kind of giggling sound that they got on the recorder, so it was audible. Perhaps the child was the one who dropped the piece of metal, since
trying
that
to get
giggle
attention.
kind of came during that.
Yeah.
And you could see the outline on the bench in the dust, so it was definitely, there was no doubt, because I was like, what was that noise? I thought it sounded almost like a doorbell, the way it was ringing, because when the metal hit the ground and it had that kind of metallic ring, I was like, is there a doorbell that just went off? When they tested the metal piece for the sound, it was the exact same sound. And then the episode went off the rails.
It did.
Yeah, Kelly, we talk in the Spooktacular crew a lot. We talk on the podcast about fakery going on in paranormal shows, and it seems to be rampant these days.
It sure does.
The one show that I've always been like, other than Kindred Spirits, that I've always been like, no, I trust ghost hunters. I don't think they would do that. Okay, well, now I've changed my mind. This episode did it for me. And I mean, it was rather disgusting for me. Jason brought in his daughter, Satori. She and her boyfriend do this hand-holding thing. Probably some of you have heard about it or seen it. What they do is they go through the ABCs. To me, it's like table tipping. This is what they used to do back with spiritualism when they would have a seance and they would ask them to like rap on the wall or tap on the table as they were saying, A, B, C. They went through the ABCs really fast. I mean, it was like A, B, C, D. I'm like, you need to take a little bit of a pause, because how do you know when you got to tap if it was for the C or the D, because you're doing it so quick. But anyway, they get the letters O, R, V, I. Now, when you hear those letters and you've asked for a name, so can you give us your name, and you get O, R, V, I, what is the name you think's coming?
Popcorn.
Popcorn?
Orville, of course. Sorry.
I didn't put the two together. Orville Redenbacher. All right, Kelly, you got me
I
with
couldn't
that
help
one.
myself.
Yes. So I was watching this episode. You didn't see it.
Right.
But I'm like, oh, the name's going to be Orville. Well, they just stopped. They didn't continue to go on. And Satori goes, oh, your first name is Orvie? And I was like,
Who's ever heard of that name?
what? How would you even get that as the first name? I've never heard of that as a first name. Then they ask about the last name, and they get the letters C and L, and the boyfriend goes, oh, Clyde?
For a last name. Okay.
I was like, a last name of Clyde? I would not have thought of that.
Clark would have been the first one for me.
Yeah, I mean, you only get those two letters? How do you stop after two letters?
Exactly. You're going to continue on, so you get confirmation.
Then they asked if it was an inmate. No. Then if it was someone who worked there, and they got responses that led them to believe it was a sheriff. Sure enough, Jason Googles Orvie Clyde, and he's in the 1940 census.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's true because I actually Googled it as well the minute I heard the name, and up it popped. And then Jason said, oh, I've got it here in the 1940 census. And the other thing that I've heard people accusing Satori and her boyfriend of doing is they're wondering where the knocks are coming from, because there are knocks that are indicating what letters. And as we know with the Fox sisters, they were like cracking knuckles and things like that to make the noises.
Yeah.
So we don't know if any of
though.
their table tipping was legit.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what these two are doing.
Right.
Because clearly I think that this whole thing was fraudulent. So they had to have been doing something to make that noise. So I go over to see if I can get some more information here about hauntings at this place. Reddit called this fakery, and we completely agree. I mean, I was just like, what are the chances that you're going to get Orvie Clyde to come through like that? Then apparently the problem that this sheriff is having that they can help him with is he's looking for his pen. Now, I know if I die and I have misplaced my fountain pen, I'm going to be very worried about where is that. But anyway, somehow, I don't even know how, I think my brain was still going, what is happening here?
What is happening?
They figured out to look behind a baseboard. And I don't even know how they figured out this part of the baseboard. And wouldn't you know, they pull it away from the wall and there's an old fountain pen.
Because why wouldn't a fountain pen be behind some random baseboard? And, I'm just going to think to go pull it out and find it.
I mean, we want to believe, but this was just so fake. And if it wasn't, they need to hire a new video editor.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like we weren't there, but a lot of things come across strangely when they edit. So I don't know, but it sure didn't.
Let me just tell you, Kelly, if
realistic.
we were putting together a documentary or an investigation, actually we have made
Indeed.
some videos for YouTube. I certainly would not cut out the parts where we're getting the full names
Exactly.
because it leaves you open to this kind of thing. Because I'm like, how do we know that you didn't look that up ahead of time? Of course you looked it up ahead of time. Who would be a sheriff that would be here? We haven't heard anything about him haunting this location.
Well, my head goes to this is Satori's doing because this is just going on with her stuff versus we usually see really good stuff from Jason and his team. So
Yes. And so I'm wondering if Jason's a little bit blinded here because this is his kid.
it's just very unfortunate all the way around.
Well, a lot of people were commenting on Reddit that Ghost Hunters went down the minute he brought those two on. And I already had bad feelings towards these two because they were going by the paranormal couple and they had a traveling haunted objects museum. And we, like Greg and Dana Newkirk, who have the traveling museum of the oddities and stuff. So Dana and Greg actually changed the name of their traveling museum because, I mean, basically
These
they were
two.
getting stepped on here. So they were like, we're just going to change it to the Newkirk Museum and put our name on it because then nobody can steal it or anything like that. Obviously, there are lots of haunted museums out there, but the Newkirks were the ones that had a traveling one. So I just was very disappointed
Sure.
because I was like buying into everything because the minute I saw that at the end, I went, okay, then who was in the cell and threw the metal on the ground? Now, the child laughing, they did catch that on recorder, but I was just like, all of a sudden I started doubting any of it.
Right.
Because I'm like, if you're doing that, then I have to think that you're doing some other shizy stuff.
It's just very unfortunate to put that taste in everybody's mouth.
Yeah, and I think the problem is a lot of people want something quick to watch, give me the good stuff. Ghost hunting doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't.
And that's why a lot of these videos that we see online, I mean, what I've started doing now is like, here's our best hits from our investigation, and I'll just put all the good stuff on there rather than here's an hour of us investigating, because I know people aren't going to stick around for it.
Right. Well, it's a very slow process typically as well.
Exactly.
It's not boom, 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 all this evidence happening.
So that's all we have on the Bastille. And so I was like, I want to flesh this episode out with a little bit more. Are there any other haunted locations in Hanford? And so we did find a couple other ones. We're going to start here with the Kings County Courthouse.
Yes, a palate cleanser, as it were.
Yes.
Right across from the Bastille is the old Kings County Courthouse. The Kings County Courthouse was built in 1896 and designed by John Haggerty and W.H. Wilcox in the classic revival style. There was an expansion in 1914, and it ran as a courthouse until 1976. It was remodeled in the 1980s and now houses offices, shops, and restaurants. Every year it hosts a haunted house attraction for Halloween, and that is fitting, as people claim that something unseen lurks here, flashing on and off lights and locking and unlocking doors.
Next, we have the Hanford Fox Theater. William Fox had been born in Hungary in 1879, and his family immigrated to America shortly thereafter. His family was poor, and William started work early to support his family by selling candy in Central Park. He also worked as a newsie. Fox started his own company in 1900 and soon turned his interest to buying theaters and eventually building them too. In 1915, he founded the Fox Film Corporation, and in the 1920s, he founded the Fox West Coast Theaters chain. And if you're wondering, yes, 20th Century Fox gets the Fox name from him, as does Fox News, Fox Sports, and the Fox Corporation.
Oh, wow.
William Fox built the Hanford Fox Theater in 1929, and it was designed as an atmospheric theater, which most of our listeners are probably familiar with. These are those theaters that tried to give the impression of being outside under a night sky with twinkling stars and a crescent moon. The rest of the decor imitated a Spanish courtyard, and Greco-Roman columns supported the proscenium. The large fireproof screen at the Hanford Theater depicts a Spanish village with cypress trees and several buildings with terracotta roofs. The exterior is designed in a mission style with a glorious tower offset from the center, and I love my old theaters. The theater was set up for stage shows with vaudeville providing entertainment before films. Interestingly, Fox thought that the moving picture flicks were a passing fad. Clearly not.
The Hanford Theater wasn't doing well after television came onto the scene, and it was slated to become a cheap shoebox theater or Triple X Palace.
That's what ended up happening to a lot of these.
But it was saved by a man named J. Daniel Humison in 1979. He was a historic preservationist, and he enlisted his family to help him save the theater. They renovated it and reopened it in 1982 with 889 seats downstairs and 142 seats in the balcony, which was nicknamed the Cabaret. There are live entertainers and the occasional movie and silent film. Humison has said that he hasn't experienced any kind of ghostly activity, but the custodial staff have told him that they see the apparition of an old, frail woman sitting in the balcony in seat A33. Humison finds this strange because the only death at the theater was a male projectionist in the 1940s. There is also something strange going on with the prop. Humison said, "There is something going on with this prop that was left behind. A cane that keeps moving around and being found in different places. One time it was hanging from the light fixtures, which are 20 feet high. It's most likely someone playing tricks."
Maybe, but who got up 20 feet high to put it up there? That's what I'd
Indeed.
like to know.
One heck of an arm to throw it.
Next is this pizza joint, which I love the name of it, Fat Albert's.
Hey.
I mean, the fat is Fatte, but you know what
I
they're
know.
naming it for.
Yeah.
So it's Fat Albert's Pizza Company. It's just a couple blocks away from the Bastille. It's located at 110 East 7th Street. The owner, Wendy Gonzalez, told the Hanford Sentinel that her employees were afraid to go down into the basement and that she herself had experienced creepy things. The paper shares, Gonzalez said that one evening she was visiting with one of her friends and 5 of her fellow employees were working in the kitchen when suddenly the front door of the restaurant opened and slammed shut. Footsteps could be heard across the restaurant floor, then the door to the basement opened and slammed shut, and pizza boxes flew off the counter. There was no wind that night, and our doors cannot slam shut because they have an apparatus that forces them to close slowly, she said. When it happened, both my friend and I said, "What in the world was that?"
I would imagine.
Yeah, that would be very weird. And I know what she's talking about those doors, they kind of catch themselves. So how do you slam it?
Next, we have the Irwin Street Inn and Restaurant, which is located at 522 North Irwin Street. A family by the name of Wright built the original main house in the 1890s. In 1980, preservationist Max Walden bought the house and renovated it. Walden wasn't satisfied with just that house. He purchased several other nearby buildings so that there were eventually 4 buildings in the compound. The main building was always 2-story, but the other 3 were 1-story. So they were all raised up so that the first floors became the second floors. All buildings were decorated with Victorian furniture and had a stained glass window in each room, and the bathrooms featured pull-chain toilets, sinks on pedestals, and clawfoot tubs.
Yeah, so they were kept kind of to their
Love it.
original.
The rooms have been updated again with modern amenities like showers, televisions, and Wi-Fi. Celebrities performing at the Fox Theater like to stay here, and events can be hosted like weddings and banquets.
The restaurant was owned by Frank Garcia in 2010. He had claimed that he never really experienced anything, but the people through the years claimed that there were 3 ghosts on the property. Guests claimed to see full-bodied apparitions in the dining area and on the second floor. Garcia said there was one time where we were getting strange calls from room 101 that sounded like someone speaking in tongues.
Oh my goodness.
Now that would freak me out because somebody speaking in tongues sounds kind of weird. The problem was no one was in that room. We knew that for sure. Other things that have happened include sheets getting moved around, windows being slammed shut, and lamps switching themselves on and off.
Just don't short sheet my bed.
Yeah, definitely don't do that.
The city of Hanford has some very cool historic buildings in its downtown area and a few Victorian homes. Tourists say it's a nice place to visit, especially if you are seeking ghosts. Are the Bastille and these other locations in Hanford haunted?
That is for you to decide. Well, it's a cool building. I hope that they could find somebody who either wants to buy it or try to fix it up in some way. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to fall apart. We'd love to have you head over to our website, historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. We had gotten an email from Savannah about the Winchester Mystery House, and she was asking she was just kind of thinking about what was going on in this house. She said, so spirits figured out what Sarah was doing with the house, and she was trying to keep them distracted. Do you think some of them got tired of the game Or I guess in my mind, the best way to put it is the constant hide and go seek. Do you think if there were spirits, some of them were nice and glad that she was trying to help them? And do you think in Sarah's mind there were ones who were evil, bad, or upset about the guns? Do you think they really found her and sought her out and tried to hurt her because her father-in-law made the guns? And do you think that's why she had a good amount of rooms blocked off with the 13 nails to keep the bad and evil spirits in until they became a pure or happy spirit? I was just curious to see what you guys thought about that. So I wrote her back and I said, the story about her meeting with the psychic and him saying, oh, you've got to keep building on this house to confuse the spirits because they're after you and want to get you because they were killed by Winchester guns. I'd heard that was just a legend, that actually never happened.
Yeah, I've heard the same.
The truth of the matter is it's called the Winchester Mystery House because I think none of us have any idea what was going on there.
Exactly.
For all we know,
actually know,
she might have been a little mentally ill, and then she's hiring lots of different contractors because she would have one for a while and either they would quit or she would fire them. So there was no set plan. So you got to think after a while, either they're like, ooh, I'm glad I'm making some money here, or they were like, I just can't keep going with this craziness. Why are we having doors open up to nothing? Why are we building a staircase that goes up to a floor and you can't even get up on that floor through the staircase? I'm not sure. I also clearly believe there's a delineation between an evil spirit and a good spirit or what have you, or an angry spirit. I don't think you can help an evil spirit become good or whatever. So I said, I don't think she was helping them in that way. I think maybe she clearly seemed to have been having seances. So I don't know if she was just trying to communicate because she was into that kind of thing too. Because I would think if you were afraid of spirits, you would not have seances or try to communicate with them.
Yeah, I would imagine not.
So I think she had a relatively good experience with most of the spirits. I just don't think we'll ever know why she built such a crazy house. There are some people who actually theorize that she wanted it to be crazy like that. So when people came to visit, they would just be like, wow, there's nothing like this in the world.
Probably.
Which could be the case too.
Makes more sense.
Thank you for writing us, Savannah. We want to thank you guys for joining us for this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We want to welcome into the cemetery Brenda Wheeler. We're going to be burying you in a garden crypt. And that means in 3 months, you're going to get your own HGB logo mug. And then in a year, you'll get your choice of t-shirt.
Thank you so much for supporting History Goes Bump. We certainly appreciate it.
Have a spooky experience that occurred at an historic location? Want to give us feedback or have a suggestion for the show? Share it with us at historygoesbump@gmail.com.
And by 2019, it was determined that a single degassing tube would be sufficient to keep the lake explosion free. And for anybody who has really bad gas, maybe you should get those pipes too.
Stick a pipe up your butt.
The Taki Yokets, and I hope I said that right, were the first to reside in the area that would become Hanford.
Hanford? Hanover? I want some pretzels. The jail's next iteration.
Sounds like you're rewinding.
Well, it didn't feel like it came out of my mouth correctly. As people claim that something unseen me. Why can I not say lurks? It won't, stuck in my mouth.